Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm going to ask you some question about numbers and how this review was designed, but I never want to forget in this that the particular instance we're talking about here involved 4 million families, and it involved people who lost their homes, whose lives were turned upside down, people who didn't sleep, people who had to tell their children that they were going to have to change schools. It's a terrible process that we've gone through. And the whole point of this review was to bring some justice, to give these families some compensation for what happened, to try to help them, but also to identify the wrongdoing and hold the financial institutions that broke the law accountable. So that was the whole idea behind this. And now the OCC and the Federal Reserve have announced a settlement. And the OCC has described this as it's based, at least in part, on a 6.5% error rate. I think I said earlier it was in their press release. I think that actually was a statement from the head of the OCC. But that means this is all the families are going to get from the regulators who were supposed to be looking out for them. The regulators who were supposed to be watching that this never happened in the first place, and the regulators who were supposed to conduct the investigation afterwards to make sure that these families were taken care of and that the banks were held accountable. So the questions I have are around how accurate the OCC and Federal Reserve settlement is. Does it really identify the law breaking that went on and appropriately hold these banks accountable? So I'm really asking the question, have the families been protected or have the banks been protected? So I want to go back to one that I asked in the first panel, just to make sure I've got this right. And that is, I understand that you looked at about 100,000 files of the 700,000 or so that were initially collected for you. That's a subset of the 4 million families for which the review was designated. So you looked at about 13% of the files that came to you, about 2% of the overall. And as I understand it, you just looked at the files as they came to you. So I just want to ask this question again, Mr. Alt. Did you look at a random sample so that you could draw an inference about what had happened to all 4 million people?
Senator, our sampling methodology was designed to include extensive random sampling, and we were seeking to obtain results at a high level of statistical confidence.
That's right. And so when the work that you were doing was halted, had you completed a random sample of the 4 million families who were under review?
No, Senator, we had not.
All right. And I understand that this is, you were not the ones who halted this process, that the OCC and the Fed halted this process. But I want to be clear about that. Does that mean then that what you found tells us whether or not the illegal practices of the banks occurred in 1% of the cases or occurred in 90% of the cases?
Senator, we were not in a position to conclude that based on the results at the time of the settlement.
All right. Thank you for clearing that up, Mr. Alt. I appreciate it. I have another question, again, about what you were asked to do by the Federal Reserve and the OCC. Whenever something, you have to code these cases, basically. You've got to read these cases. I know they were very complicated. And in effect, decide what box they belong in. Was there illegal activity? Did it cause someone to lose a home? No illegal activity? That sort of thing, all the way through. And it's a fairly complicated process. So it's pretty standard when you're putting something together like this that you worry about whether or not the person doing the evaluation gets it right. Your judgment call might be different from his judgment call. Shoot. You might have a lazy examiner, right, who says, yeah, it's all just great, and passes them all through. So the way we deal with that is you take some number of those cases, and they're slotted in to be coded a second time. And then there's a comparison between the first time and the second time, and you figure out what the error rate is that your own evaluators are putting into it. So the first question I have is, what did the OCC and the Fed require of you in terms of this sort of double coding to figure out the error rate? Mr. Ault?
Senator, we built in processes exactly as you describe into our methodology, and we presented them to the OCC, and I infer that they were satisfied because they accepted them. But that was not their express requirement. Perhaps they would have required it if we hadn't built them in ourselves.
That's all right. So what was your rate of double coding?
I don't know that I could give you an overall rate. We could perhaps obtain that.
All right. So let me ask it a different way. What was your error rate?
It changed over time, and it depended on which files we were looking at. We were reporting error rates to ourselves weekly, so we monitored that all the time.
Can you give me an idea of what your error rate was? What was the range?
Senator, I don't think I could do that off the top of my head. I would have to go and perform that research. I'd be happy to look into it for you.
All right. And was the error rate coming down over time?
I believe it was, yes.
All right. So I'd like to know about the error rate. Mr. Flanagan, same question for you.
So specific to the error rate, unlike the prior comments about being able to disclose to you the fee information, the error rate information, we believe we're not allowed to disclose at this point in time by the terms of the engagement letters that we have signed.
You can't tell me whether you had an error rate of 1% or 90%?
That's my understanding, is that at this point we're not able to do that.
Mr. Ryan?
We're under the same confidentiality provisions. What I will tell you is that the error rate that's been reported in the media that for our work is mischaracterized.
All right. I think I will stop there, Mr. Chairman, since it's clear that we don't have the information we need to determine the numbers on which the OCC has based and the Fed has based this settlement. Thank you.